I will tell you of Niord and the worm. You have heard the tale before in many guises, wherein the hero was named Tyr, or Perseus, or Siegfried, or Beowulf, or even Saint George. But it was Niord who met the loathy, demoniac thing that crawled hideously up from hell, and from which meeting sprang the cycle of hero tales that revolves down the age until the very substance of the truth is lost and passes into the limbo of all forgotten legends. I know whereof I speak, for I was Niord. Slay the Beast, dear viewers. Another exciting and perhaps contentious episode of our podcast awaits. Tonight, Roll of Attention will dive into another story by Robert E. Howard, who at this point should be fine without an introduction. Leaping straight off the page of Weird Tales, The Valley of the Worm was first published in 1934, the February issue of this hallowed magazine. The story follows James Allison, a man in the 1930s who sees the impossible. His consciousness has traveled back in time to witness the birth of 1,000 stories. From this starting point, we are treated to Howard's classic storytelling, filled with tribesmen, ape humanoids, and monsters of the yesteryears. All bloodshed and struggle lead to the Valley of the Worm. That is the tale that we are looking at today. And I would very much like to hear what everyone else thinks about the story. Let's start with XJ.
Oh, me? Wow. I'll go ahead and spoiler everything. And
Yeah, we're
start off.
totally full spoilers, everybody.
Yeah. Well, not just a story, but I'm giving away everything.
Just everything?
Including
Everything that's in your house?
including the score. Yeah. Like
Including the score?
including the score. Like I'm trying to decide whether this story should be lower in score than the Island of the Black Ones. That terrible paycheck Conan story that you described as. I can't even remember the name. Is that
Pool of the black one?
the Pool of the Black One?
It's a bad sign when you get the name of the story wrong.
Exactly. Like I'm giving away everything that I feel about the story. Yeah, I'm trying to decide whether the story should be lower in score than that. Unfortunate thing I had to read. A lot of it has to do with there is a very peculiar and repetitive focus on the purity of the Nordic race right from the start of the story. And I want to say something first, and that is I don't have a problem with racist writers if they don't shove the thing into my face. Like I had no problems with the Call of Cthulhu, for instance, even though H.P. Lovecraft himself had been just documented with certain views that might have been outdated.
Yeah, I mean, even for his own time, he was like pretty bad.
Yes, but I had no problems with the Call of Cthulhu because it wasn't shoved in my face the way the story is. And you know, the thing is, I don't even know if Robert E. Howard himself is racist because there's a very curious worship of beautiful Nordic muscles here. But Robert E. Howard himself is an Irishman, so I don't know where this thing is coming from. And it could just be his writing in the first person narrative of James Allison, and he wants to be in character and something like that. But I find that the choice to write in first person to be unfortunate, because if Robert E. Howard is not himself, doesn't himself think that way, because how do I say this? He doesn't give enough. So he wrote in the first person narrative, and he didn't give enough background to the character of James Allison to separate the character from Robert E. Howard himself. You know, so the whole thing just comes across as Robert E. Howard telling us how much he worships Nordic muscles and all that, and because this is the other thing, as a first person narrator, we aren't really brought into the mind of James Allison all that much. We were mostly told, what is mostly described to us is actually Niord himself, you know. So that's a really weird. I find the whole thing to be really weird. Hero worship of himself. Like, James Allison is basically hero worshipping himself. And I just find the whole thing to be strange, and the very repetitive insistence on you know, I don't even know if I should call it racism. It's more like race essentialism or something like that, because like Niord is just as dismissive of white people that came down to the jungle, picked and then picked up their ways or something like that. That's just something really odd about the whole thing. But putting that aside, and the very, very colorful descriptions of the Pict and the Stygians, I have to say, I don't find like the ending of the story to be. I find it very below Robert E. Howard's usual level, because it is a very anticlimactic the ending is very anticlimactic, because he built the worm to such a height that the way the worm is taken down, I thought was just like, oh, this is such a letdown. And maybe if, because so in that area that Niord and his tribe found themselves in, there were four big enemy if you don't count the jungle itself. There are three big enemies. First, the saber-toothed tiger, and then the serpent Sathra, I believe that's the name. And then the worm himself. Like the saber-toothed tiger was built up to be such a terrible creature. We don't actually see the fight. It all happened off screen, so to speak. We only saw the aftermath of the fight, where Niord was laid up in bed for 3 days or a week or something like that, and close to death. And Satra the serpent is supposed to be even more terrible creature than the saber tooth. And okay, I can forgive the way the encounter with Satra went, because sometimes a very, very clever strategies can take down a terrible beast that might have been, or even if the beast is not as big a challenge as the saber tooth could be. But the worm fight was just like, first of all, out of nowhere, Niord had the idea to use the poison of Satra to defeat the worm. Where did that idea come from? And the thing is, the worm had been built to a point where it's basically like the avatar of some eldritch god or the other. It's like it's like such a terrible being, came from some other dimension and stuff like that. And the way the worm died is to the poison of Satra. It's, come on, man. There's got to be more than that. And I can't help but think that if Robert E. Howard had spent less time on admiring Nordic muscles, maybe he could have put in more effort to the ending of the story, so that I don't have a problem with the fight itself. I just have a problem with the way the worm is defeated. It seems so mundane compared to how the creature was built up to be. And yeah, that's my take. I've read better stories than this, I suppose.
Yes, it does sound exactly like that. You know, one added context for the viewers and the my colleagues, let's say, what Howard is describing is not just his fantasy, although it is very clear that he really enjoys it, but also at the time one must understand and remember that this was a prevalent scientific theory, that there was like a huge huge processions of these tribes people, Aryan tribes people, that went around the world and conquered and pushed and took lands and all that kind of stuff. So this is not just like him thinking of like a new alternative history or something like that. He's actually taking something that was pretty popular during his time, just like in the previous stories that we've done about Howard, where he's taking elements that are real or as were to be believed real during his time, like the sowers of the thunder, right? That was a historically based story here. So here, of course, there's a lot more imagination put into it. There's like this crazy worm and so on and so forth, ape people and so on and so forth. But it is not coming from the mind of like him solely. So the idea that like he completely and utterly constructed this scenario just to make the Aryans look good doesn't hold up to the candle. However, it is very much, like, as what did you say, Nordic muscle worshipping?
Yes,
there's a lot of
indeed.
that. There's a lot of that, but there's also a lot of that in Conan too.
I mean,
have to
okay.
say.
Okay, the worshipping on Nordic muscle was just like my very funny take on it. But look, back in
Maybe
the
it's
day,
Aryan muscles, worship of Aryan muscles.
yeah, back in the day in the 1950s, there was a very big interest in radioactive products. Shall we put it mildly?
Oh yeah.
And
Oh,
you
you're
have-
talking about the cream? Go on,
Yes,
go on.
and then you have these girls who put I'm not even talking about the cream at this point, who were putting radium onto watches, and the way they did it was they were told in the factories that you need to lick the brush to then put the radium
paint
onto
on.
to paint on the watch, and the
Make
result
the point finer.
result was that all their jaws fell off. Now you can say
Yeah,
that
I
is a
think-
product of its time, and you
Yeah.
could say, okay, people didn't know anything about radium then, but you'd be really stupid to be licking radium now. And so that might be the case that Robert E. Howard wasn't pulling things off his ass, but at the same time, in the same vein, it's probably not a good idea to go about licking radium off a brush.
I'm not recommending anybody to write a story like this in the current time. I don't think I ever
Yeah.
said that.
Yeah.
All I wanted to do was to add a little bit more context. Robert, how
Yeah,
about you?
I-
How did you feel about today's
Yeah.
story?
I was relieved actually because it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be.
Sorry.
Out
What
of
about
this,
180?
now this collection I've got here, Wolf's Head, Tales by Robert E. Howard, in more in the Lovecraft vein than his other stories. I don't think it's his. It's not his best vein in which to write, but this one was better than I thought it was. Not that I was all that taken with the worm itself. It was all right. Actually, I thought that the encounter with Sather the snake was more impressive than the one that followed with the real quarry, the worm. Partly
I
because I
agree.
suppose the worm is a bit Lovecraftian, one of the things from the abyss and all that. And I don't think Howard is that brilliant at that kind of thing. But to take up some other points that XJ made, for example, this business of hero worship of oneself, that's absolutely true. And I think it's part of the childlike consciousness of primitivism as depicted by Howard, and that's actually a plus in the story. It's a bit like the childishness of, in a very different context, the Three Musketeers. I mean, D'Artagnan and his buddies are very childish, but that's how they are, and it helps. You wouldn't want them to be any other way as far as the story is concerned. I know we're not talking in the 17th century. France isn't supposedly a barbaric age, but it's an age in which childishness has its important place. Now, another point which I like about the story is that, and this is a bit, shows what a bloody minded partisan I am of anti-wokeness, and that I rub my hands with glee when I think of the wokies reading this story and getting all upset because of, for example, use of the word black. Now, they're so dumb, these wokies, they don't realize that the word black can have more than one meaning. If I may quote from page, what is it, 29, I think, of this book. Yes, on the one hand, you've got the sentence talking about head hunting and cannibalism. These things are natural adjuncts to the jungle. The Picts did not learn them from the black people, for there were no blacks among those hills. Right, so that's black as in skin black. And then a bit later, we came into that brutish hill country with its squalling abysms of savagery and black primitiveness. Now there, black means something different. It means, as in Macbeth, was it good things of day begin to droop and drowse when night's black agents to their prey do rouse. Now, Shakespeare wasn't saying that there were people with black skins in 11th century Scotland, but I suspect
That's
that
strange.
the wokies now, the totally dumb wokies would say, we don't like this. It's
I
upsetting.
like if you've made this straw man and you're just beating the shit out of him. Excuse me for the language, but yeah, please carry on.
What I like to do.
So
anyway,
black as in dark, black as in darkness or evil. Because let's face it, when bodies rot, when matter rots, it turns black. It turns to carbon. It's like carbonizes, right? So
I mean,
black
look,
is associated with like decay and not just skin
it's
color.
I
see what you're
think, at
saying.
least this is my theory, but I think it's even easier than that. Look, when it's night, it's dark. Dark is scary. Dark is when you die. Day, pretty okay. You can see everything. Black
Right.
and white, good and evil, whatever. Day and
So
night.
I think
That's
I
really
think
what it's
that's
about, right? Like
I
those.
think Robert
yeah,
has an
That's
astute. I think Robert has a valid, astute analysis of, yes, the different
That
uses of the word.
analysis doesn't hold up in the pool of the black ones though, because that is just bad use of black.
But it has nothing to do with race, the pool of the black one.
No, because because if you remember, in the Pool of the Black Ones, he had no other way of describing the antagonist except black and ebony skinned giant men. It is very bad.
Perhaps I have forgotten that episode too much, but I don't know, man. I just kind of I always thought, like, when they're talking about black, like my T-shirt black, like unnatural black color. I never
mean,
thought of it as
it
like
was-
someone
it-
of
I-
dark skin.
I mean, I remember it vividly because it was now it's tied with this story, but at that time it was the most terrible Robert E. Howard story I've ever read.
You've ever read? Well,
Yeah.
Yeah,
we're
and
glad to keep improving that.
We can
score.
let Robert get back to his points and let him finish. But I mean, I'm just looking through on the black thing. The black gulfs of black wings, black gulf. So he uses it clearly context clues to mean, like, in a lot of instances, dark, evil, corrupt. So anyway, you talked about a straw man earlier, Nikki. I'm steel manning his argument for him.
Oh shit! Here we go.
So, but go ahead, Robert. But let him finish. So we don't want to interrupt.
One more point that XJ made was that the death of the worm is a bit anticlimactic. I would agree with that. It reminds me, again, my mind flits from book to book in a rather fantastic way, of the death of Dracula. That was pretty anticlimactic as well. Enormously powerful villain just gets dispatched by a last minute or last second thrust of the whatever it was. But that's how things sometimes happen. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't think any less of the story. Partly, as I say, because in any case, I thought the fight was that Sather the serpent was more impressive anyway. But yeah, on the whole, I think it was a good enough story. I don't know if I'll ever bother to reread it, because there's so many other things that I'd rather read. But I'm glad I did read it, and it shows that I wasn't completely wasting my money getting Wolf's Head by Robert E. Howard. From the smouldering fires of hell itself, evil unleashes a new reign of horror, says the cover.
Ooh.
Wow. Well, that marketing line is pretty good.
All right, Anthony. What about you? How did you feel about the story?
I was very torn by this, and I feel like I feel like every time I'm on the show, I feel like I need to have, consider the time in which this story was written tattooed on some part of my body. Because, all these stories that we're reading from the seminal period of the early 20th century with the pulps, it really is like always brings to mind, that idea, and also death of the author. Can you have the death of the author, and separate the author from the fiction? But in this case, Howard made it really really hard to, like, separate, and to separate the author and to let the author die and just let the story live on its own merits. But we talked about Lovecraft earlier. One of his, I mean, and by all accounts, Howard was like, "Dude, you're racist." Like, to Lovecraft, and one of my favorite Lovecraft stories is Pickman's Model. And I'm Italian American, descent, and he uses the word dago, which is a derogatory term in Lovecraft's story for Pickman's Model. He derides, all these dagos in this neighborhood don't know the things beneath that dwell beneath them. And I'm like, okay. So, but
all right, Lovecraft, dude.
listen, as a white person, I have the luxury of brushing past that. Okay, I mean, so it's like I've always ignored this, and it's easier to ignore it in, like, when it's little dribs, like XJ was saying. Okay, all right, you read a Conan story or you read a Lovecraft story, and it's like, he says something about, like, the kind of hints that white people are superior, or even certain ethnicities of white people, like, well, Italians are inferior whites, clearly. So by calling them Dagos. So it's like, okay. So, but this story was like an info dump of it. It was like, and there's during his lifetime, Robert E. Howard lived during two movements that I think play into this story, and he coalesces into this story, if I may be so bold: spiritualism and eugenics. So eugenics was hugely popular in America, and it had been since the late 1800s, and that was like, good breeding. Eugenics really just means good stock or good breeding, but it was taken to like this extreme where it eventually became like forced sterilization, and how can we breed out certain aspects of the human being. And then obviously famously the Nazis took that and ran with it and put it on steroids and did horrific things with that, with the eugenics movement that they were inspired by America. So it's just like, to read it is like, ugh, gross, like you feel disgusting like reading it. And I get what Robert's saying. And listen, I'm by no means a wokey. And the other thing I'm pushing back on is like, there were people definitively back in the day who knew that eugenics and the way we were implementing it in these states was bad. And that's why it changed, because people instinctually know deep down, if they listen to themselves, oh well, this is not good. We shouldn't think about people this way. But it's like, that's why things change, because there are people that go, no, we all know this is wrong. So the whole time period, oh, you have to understand the time period in which a person was living and writing. Yeah, to a point. But even back then in the 1930s, there were people who knew this wasn't good. Like, eugenics is not good. Being racist is not good. Come on, guys. So I'm not a wokey. I
I
don't
just
want this
imagine you come
story.
out of your time machine. Being racist is bad, so is eugenics. Come on, guys.
Right.
And you like close the
Listen,
door.
I don't want
Listen.
this story to be I don't want this story to be excised from history. I want people to read it.
Mm.
I don't even want trigger warnings put on it or any stupid stuff like that. I'm not into that. But for us to just go, well, it's just the time you wrote in, that's not good either. So like, I don't
Mm.
want things like, I don't want to burn books. I don't want to knock down statues per se. But we at least need to be real and say, nah, if you're passing this on to a kid, say like, listen, if you have any questions on the story and some things are weird and it conflicts with the current, like, hey, let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation about it. I think Robert has a point. Like, you don't need to like be woke, but you also don't need to just kind of give the history a pass, because those who disregard history are doomed to repeat it. So you just don't say, oh, that's just the time they lived in. You're kind of giving the past a pass at that point. So I feel like I'm in the middle. I'm not woke, as the current buzz term is, which is kind of getting everybody virtue signals on the left, the right, the middle, the center, and all different directions. Everybody virtue signals. It just depends on what virtues you're signaling about: more conservative, more liberal, or whatever. So everybody's woke in some way on the left and the right, because there's things that you're going to be all on a bunch about and you're going to get your underwear in a bunch about. It's just different from what the other person believes in. Anyway, we're talking about stories, right? We're talking about literature here. As a piece of fiction and writing, I'm always jealous of his writing. I think Howard's writing is like muscular, like vivid, gut wrenching, great. Is this up to the par with a Conan story? No. Did I think the ending was sort of anticlimactic with like the worm? That's interesting that we all kind of came to that conclusion. The fight with the saber-tooth tiger was better. Even the snake was better. I'm a role player, so having to get the venom of the most powerful giant snake on the planet before you have to use the venom from the snake to kill the interdimensional worm creature. Cool. I like that. I kind of like that aspect of it. It's like a quest. You know, yeah. I mean, could I have done with Okay, I get what Robert's saying. Not to go back to the woke part of things, but I get what Robert's saying about like, oh well, black can have the meaning of like corruption or evil or whatever. Okay, fine. Let's give that. Let's give that. But then I noticed that Niord, or whatever the guy's name is, Allison, James Allison or whatever in the beginning of the story, he never incarnates into anyone but the good northern stock. So come on. Okay, maybe it's not as like, oh, he's saying the word black and he thinks blacks are primitives. Okay, that's too easy. Okay, we'll give you that. That's not really what he's saying. But Then how come you didn't reincarnate into like some Egyptian royalty or something there, pal? And that's what the thing was with eugenics and the spiritualism movement back then too, with Edgar Casey. That idea of reincarnating came from the mentalist or the spiritualist Edgar Casey, who took little naps and spoke, and people would take down his ideas as prophecy. And it was all about reincarnation. But oddly enough, people were always reincarnating into fantastic great. They were never just like, I was a guy who manned the toilets in Rome in one life. Like, no one ever did that. It was always like, I was always a prince of Egypt and blah, or prince of the Northmen. And I'm like, sure, you were never like the guy who slopped out the stables in one of these lives. Okay. So I like how he took like the spiritualism, the influence, and I kind of don't like the eugenics thing, but like you could see the product of his time coming in from those two influences. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to separate the time period and the author's biases, whatever they may be, potentially or real or otherwise, from the story. I'd say for the story, I'd give it a 7. For the potential racism, like that we should not forget about. We shouldn't burn the story, but we also shouldn't forget about the past, because otherwise we kind of give the modern day a pass to be like, oh, don't worry, people will just judge you because that's the time you lived in, so go do whatever. I don't know. So actual story, craft of writing, I'd give it like, I know I'm sorry, I'm going early with my ratings. I'll back off, but I'm thinking like 7. But the
Why?
rating is going to be
I've
low.
already told everyone what I'm gonna rate the story, so you might as well.
7 for writing, the -1 for the racism, implied or otherwise.
Negative
All
1
right.
rating. I think that's
All
the
right.
first.
Now you have the
That's-
feather, Nikki.
Diatribe over. Sorry.
No problem. First of all, I want to say that I don't think any racist, and I've lived in many countries. I've met a lot of racists. No racist would write an insert character of themselves that would negotiate with the natives of the people that they don't like, and then get a sidekick from them. That doesn't make any sense to me, right? So I don't think in any way, shape, or form that Robert E. Howard is racist from the stanzas of what we are considering here. Is he a not a nationalist, but what do you call about it? What do you call it? Someone who's like proud of the. Yeah, exactly. He's like he's super into Aryan stuff, and that's really worrying, But at the same time, I don't think he's racist. He has so many characters who are of the blacker skin, and I know that that whole part of history, the African Americans and the white Americans, that's really important to the USA, right? So just as that being an example there, and him having all those characters in his stories, including this one, including the one that we're calling very racist, right? Like, just leads me to believe that there's more to it. It's not, it's not so black and white.
I don't know if it's racist. It's like it's eugenicist. It's eugenicist.
Sorry, that was a terrible pun. Sorry, what were you?
Look,
It's all right. It's eugenicist, and we shouldn't forget about that error.
Yeah. I'm not saying. Hold on,
Yeah,
I didn't
right.
say that stuff in there isn't terrible. I'm just saying I don't think he's racist. Eugenics, pretty creepy. Him also tripping balls about like, oh yeah, I was always the crazy people like Beowulf, like Perseus, like blah blah blah, right at the beginning. It's a lot of hero worshipping, a lot of like, well, look at us, look at the Western society, look at the white society, look what all we've done. So it is very much like this really unsavory patriotism that's coming through.
I mean, you realize racism is a spectrum, right? That you don't you on the one hand you do have those that will burn anything that looks different, and then you could have the very casual ones that I mean,
I think he's in a different category. I think racism is different to what he is. I think what he is that he's very proud of
perhaps
what's it called,
perhaps,
his heritage.
As I said right in the beginning, like I don't know if Robert E. Howard himself is racist.
No.
And
I
frankly,
also, by the way, have no horse in the game. I mean, like, call him racist if you want. It's just my opinion.
And frankly, it's like I mean, I was gonna say exactly that. It's like, what does it matter? The only problem I had with the biggest problem I had with the story was that it was just so repetitive about the whole thing.
Yeah,
I
so
don't think
when
he
I
was
picked the
racist.
story,
More like
yeah, go on.
maybe he was just ignorant. I don't know if he was racist, but it didn't question like a prevailing thought process of his time. I mean, do we all do that at some point? Sure. But it's like, again, people knew there was people that knew it was like, this is not good. So I don't know. He was at least, a biologically essentialist, a eugenics, like, hey, this is the good stock and I'm of it. I don't know. And there's anything wrong with other people, but we're just better. Like, okay, that's still kind of
You know,
shitty.
it's
But
it's
anyway,
funny
whatever.
because it's not like he even is of it. He's Irish.
Right. And at some points, Irish people were not considered really all that in the judgment of the other whites, the better whites. The Irish people were, and Italians, and other people of certain that would be today considered white, were not considered white,
You know, this
including the
reminds me
Irish.
of that
It's all
joke
bullshit.
about well, I think it's from Rick and Morty or something, where they go to a planet and people have different shaped nipples, and based on the shape of your nipple, you're either better or worse. And you
Right.
know, the character's like, "This is very silly," and I'm like, "Oh, I see what you're doing here."
Anyway,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean,
Sorry.
right. So when I picked this story, I didn't think that this was gonna even come up. I thought there was gonna be like a comment or two about like, well, fucking Robert E. Howard is going real hard on on the Aryan race, but I didn't think there was gonna cause such a stir. As I am slightly disconnected from this issue. For I come from the East. I come from Russia. It's not a talking point. We have problem that people are drinking too much and are killing themselves, and there's other people who don't have enough to eat. It's not an issue that is spoken of that often. We're not there yet. Let's put it like that. And I actually picked it because I think that this is the most middle ground story written by Robert E. Howard, and I wanted to see your thoughts on that, on a story that I think that it's not his best. I don't think it's his worst, but it's actually, how do I say this? It's way worse than his worst work, because in the work that's actually terrible, you can pick it apart and you can just like push on things and really get something going. But the Valley of the Worm, I think, is like, okay. And that's literally my thoughts. It's okay, right?
Yeah.
It's okay, and that's terrible. Like, I have no opinion on it. It's one of those times where I feel like a 5 out of 10, which is what I'm gonna give it, kind of feels like a 0 out of 10. Okay, I read it. That's kind of how I feel about it. There are really good points in it, though, and that's kind of Robert E. Howard's how do I say this? Signature, so to speak. He just has these sentences in his stories. You just read there and you'll go, "Oh yeah, that's pretty awesome. That's an awesome way to describe this particular thing. Well done, Robert." Right?
Yeah.
So like one of them was let me see if I can find it.
I've got one while you're
Yeah, go on.
looking.
Yeah.
As I lie here with death's black wings slowly unfolding over me, all the dim folds of my previous lives are shaken out before my eyes. The idea of lives normally compressed into a sort of accordion and then shaken out like you're shaking out a curtain or something. That's a really good phrase by the narrator James Allison near the beginning.
Listen, I think the first like 5, 6, 7 paragraphs of the story are like lyrical and beautiful and just are so wonderful. Like, I mean, I'm looking through it too, like 1, 2, 3, where he just goes through this whole concept of this. He's setting the stage for this whole concept of this reincarnation and this rebirth and this. He's seeing it on his deathbed, and like it's all flashing back. Talk about your life flashing before your eyes. All of that is indeed. I mean, it's beautiful and lyrical and poetic. Prose poetry. I mean, I'm the first, dozen paragraphs. I mean, as I flip through, I'm like, that's good, that's good, that's good. Like, I agree with you. Yeah, it's just amazing. Like that whole conceit that he's pulling together and the way he's describing it is just poetry, prose poetry. And that's what makes like my issues with the story all the more like hurt more. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry. Just wanted to agree with wholeheartedly with you guys.
My favorite sentence in the story is this: a night-born demoniac intelligence, such as men in dreams vaguely sense, throbbing titanically in the black gulfs outside our material universe. Ha! Ha ha ha! I can imagine it. I can feel it. I've had nightmares before. I know how it feels like. Amazing. Yeah, but otherwise it's just okay, and that's kind of funny because it spawned all this entire discussion that I didn't think that would even exist regarding it. But I think it's also a valuable one to have. It's just something that I accepted, I guess, as that's what Robert E. Howard wrote, and we are looking at it as a story and not whether or not this is like offensive today, right? And from the story point of view, it's just okay. From offensive point of view, I mean, are we saying 10 is good offensive and 1 is bad offensive? I don't know. It's very offensive is what I'm saying. Yes. But
I mean, my
okay,
biggest
so
problem
what?
with the story isn't even the offense part of it.
That's for me as well. That's what I'm
it's
saying, actually.
how often that bit gets repeated that makes it tiresome. It is exactly like the pool of the black ones, where the black ebony man is just like used over and over again. It's like at some point, it's like the reason why I'm struggling struggling to like place a score whether it should be higher or lower than the pool of the black ones is because at least in the pool of the black ones, when I write a first draft, occasionally I am describing a scene and I have no other words to describe the thing, and I use it over and over again. And this is a thing that Nikki, you had a problem with my first draft when I was describing a fight with the gods. I use the gods all the time. But it was the first draft, and it's like, how many ways can you describe gods? Right?
I kept waiting to say blackguards, and then I would be satisfied. But no, you just said gods.
Because the gods were not black people. So it's like I could see how the in the pool of the whatever, you could a writer could run out of ways to describe the antagonist, and then trying to sit down and to vary up the beats is going to be a pretty involved task. But that's not the case here. It was just repeated over and over again to a point where I'm like, okay, I get it. Can we move on?
Maybe it's it was an application to join the American Eugenics Society. Like, look how many times I'm beating you over the head with this. Instead of an application, I'm going to write you a story about how great Aryans are. I don't know. I kid, but you never know.
But yeah, that's about it. I don't really have much else to say about the story besides it's okay.
Yeah, it's just okay. With flashes of greatness, which is, like you said, it's like with turns of phrase and passages like you and Robert were saying that are like, mwah, chef's kiss, I wish I could have wrote that, but, so.
To do him justice, Howard didn't try and portray the Aryans as good. I mean, listen to this. I waded sword in hand through the foaming surf from Hengist Scully to lay the foundations of England in blood and pillage. Well, what a pain in the neck. Why should we look up to people like that. If you want eugenics, presumably that means breeding people to be in some way superior. Whereas Hengist and Brennus and Alaric and his Goths, who needs them? So
Yeah, right.
there is that.
That's a good point. Right. He didn't necessarily come out and say like very explicitly there, like you should be like these murderers, like these horrible ravagers from the sea or whatever. But
And you
yeah,
didn't have to be like that in those days. You could be like Buddha or Pythagoras or somebody like that, who contributes to life rather than lays it waste.
right. Priest in a monastery making illuminated manuscripts for decades and dedicating your life to that, preserving knowledge and wisdom versus
then,
burning it.
Yeah, the Vikings come and burn it. Oh, by the way, talking of Vikings, I don't think Nicky can say that he's not involved with that sort of thing, because wasn't it Swedish Vikings who drifted south and helped to found the Russian state, I think?
What you all don't know is actually I am Niord, and I've always was.
There you go. Aha.
I mean, that's one of the theories that the Rus government was started by some guy named Rurik, but I mean, there's about as much evidence about that as there is about this story being actual true fact. So.
Oh, I didn't know that.
What I just hope is like today, like we don't degenerate into like I don't believe in censorship. I think that's no matter where you're on the spectrum. I don't think anyone should believe in censorship. You shouldn't have to qualify everything or like give warnings and like life is messy. Like I think that left or right, whatever political spectrum you're on in whatever country, which is all arbitrary and BS, like you shouldn't try to sanitize life. You shouldn't try to like whitewash things, for lack of a better term. You shouldn't try to censor. You shouldn't try to burn books or eliminate things or ban books or stories. Like no side, left or right, center, or whatever. But at the same time, I feel like just me on a podcast or just talking to people, I feel like I've done my due diligence. Like, hey, young people, if you're listening to this, the parts of the story where he's kind of seems like he's saying some people are superior to others, it's not so great. We did this in the past. It wasn't a great idea. Don't forget. That's kind of like where I'm at on like the spectrum. You don't need to be woke. And I feel like our current discourse of like, yes, being offended too easily and everything, I think people are too easily offended. But it's also doesn't have to be shut down either. Conversations about the past, like don't forget the past, because I think people do anyway. People forget the past anyway. Like my one friend is fond of saying the one thing that we forget about the past is that we forget about the past. Like it's it is what it is. So, but I mean, it's at least if we're doing that, or someone, if we're all kind of talking over it like this, having a cogent conversation, not insulting each other, not trying to cancel each other. We clearly have different viewpoints here on the show, and that's life. That's what we're supposed to be doing, conversing about differences of opinion, even on great literature and fiction. And things that may be problematic, but also considering, hey, maybe it's not as problematic as I initially thought. Because I did reach out to all of you, before the show, and say this story, and then I really was kind of fuming about it, about how blatant, like like I said, like he's writing an application to like join the Eugenics Society, in story form, and I'm like, come on, man. And then I'm like, okay, yes, I'm seeing this too through my modern lens. And yes, as Robert was pointing out, like, hey, maybe I'm seeing the word, interpreting it too strictly, but, again, there are moments where it's still like, hey, maybe you can reincarnate into someone from a different ethnicity, but I don't know. So it's like, anyway, but I'm glad we had this conversation. I knew at least that we would have something that most people should have in conversations like this, instead of just shutting people down as like racist or woke or whatever off the bat without even listening to a conversation. At least I'm glad that I have you, the three of you to have this conversation with and come to the end and still respect each other, which is I feel like doesn't happen a lot in our discourse these days. So it's like we can agree to disagree. We've said our piece, and there's no censorship needed. No bannings needed, no burnings needed, just like no trigger warnings needed. Like
Mm.
It is what it is. Don't forget the past and the things that were like not quite good, or could go down wrong paths. So anyway, I appreciate you guys as usual in this conversation. But like I said, my score 7 for the pros, just okay, flashes of greatness, and no rating for obvious kind of like weird eugenics garbage that kind of filtered through and info dumped in.
The trigger warning is the date of publication, isn't it? When you see it's 1934, you think,
Right.
aha.
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 Exactly. Yeah.
Yes,
So
and I go back to my point about the radium. It's not a good idea to be leaking radium anymore.
Mm.
right. And we all know that now. But unfortunately, people had to suffer horribly and die for us to realize that. But and don't get me started on like, well, maybe their bosses knew a little bit more than they knew than they were letting on.
Oh
and said, we
yeah,
need those. We
the
need those watches
bosses
painted.
absolutely knew about the radium thing, and they totally let the girls on. And those guys need to be strung up, and I don't know if they were actually. Were they?
Yeah.
I don't
They
think
might
so.
have been. Someone always knows more than they're letting on,
Yeah.
especially in business.
Well,
Capitalism, there's the real enemy.
Anthony's given his score. I have sort of given mine. What about the two of you? Wait, Nikki has given his score as well. Robert.
Yeah, I said 5 out of 10.
Yeah. I give that one as well. Yeah, 5 out of 10.
All right. And I guess we're concluded. Unless anyone else has any last words.
Read stories.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep an open mind.
The more you read, the more immune you are to getting fanatically anything. Like, if you had a teenage relative who read nothing but Robert E. Howard, you might start getting a bit uneasy.
Right. Diversify.
Especially
Just
if
like
he
your
shows
stock
signs
portfolio.
of pillaging and so on.
Yeah,
Right.
somebody said something about like, oh yeah, give this to your kid and then say, hey, if you got any questions, let me know. And then the kid comes back and he's like, full war paint face, and he's like, where are the Picts?
Right. Yeah.
All right.
That's my
Right.
only
Or he's
question.
dressed like that. He gets on war paint with a sword and a shield, and he's like, "I'm going to the jewelry store. Do you need anything?" Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Well, like and subscribe if you enjoyed our discussion. Leave comments about what you think of the topic at hand, and drop by again on our next episode.
I can't wait for people to not listen to anything that we said and call us snowflakes or racist in the comments. Depending on who.
I'd like
Yes.
to be the rare hybrid of snow racist.
Snow
Right.
racist.
No
Okay.
racist.
Right, snowflake and
Snowflake
racist
racist.
together.
All right.
Snoricist.
Snow
Snoricist. Snoricist. I'm a snoricist.
All right.
Because I snore a lot.
Well. All right. And with that, we
Good
bid
conversation.
we bid everyone goodbye and take care.
Right.
Like and subscribe.